Hello and welcome to Praxis, the monthly series of debates and discussions relating to international development issues hosted by the World Bank in Sydney. My name's Ian Gerard, and as ever, I'd like to extend a special welcome to everyone watching at home on television or over the internet or listening on radio across the Asia Pacific. Today, in addition to our audience here in Sydney, we are again joined live by participants in Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste, as well as AusAID in Canberra. And we look forward to hearing their questions and their thoughts a little later. This month's topic is youth, and on the panel to discuss the issue are Carolyn Hardy, Chief Executive of UNICEF Australia, Joel Kalpram, a ni-Vanuatu student who spent 6 years as project manager for the Australian NGO Youth Challenge Vanuatu, and Fabia Shah, a senior education advisor at the Australian Agency for International Development, better known as AusAID. As we'll hear in greater detail later, this Friday, the 20th of November, marks the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It was the first legally binding international convention to affirm human rights for all children. Dan Seymour, Chief of the Gender and Rights Unit of UNICEF's Policy and Practice Division, has identified the number of positive ways in which the CRC has impacted on the laws and practices of nations around the world, from South America to Europe, Africa to our own region. Yet he also cautions that the very idea that children are the holders of rights is far from universally recognised, pointing out that alarming numbers of children die of preventable causes, do not attend school or attend a school that cannot offer them a decent education, are left abandoned when their parents succumb to AIDS, or are subjected to violence, exploitation and abuse against which they are unable to protect themselves. 2 of the 8 Millennium Development Goals refer specifically to young people. Goal 2 is to achieve universal primary education by 2015, yet the UN's own figures show that without further acceleration, 58 out of the 86 countries that have not yet achieved universal primary education will not achieve it by the target date. Additionally, inequalities remain a significant barrier in all regions, with the children most likely to drop out of school being girls and those from poorer households or living in rural areas. MDG 4, meanwhile, aims to reduce child mortality, but a child born in a developing country is still 13 times more likely to die within the first 5 years of life than a child born in an industrialised nation. Nor do the difficulties faced by young people in the developing world subside once infancy or primary school age has been passed. In 2005, 10 years after the UN General Assembly adopted the World Programme of Action for Youth, the World Youth Report found that over 200 million youth were living in poverty, 130 million were illiterate, 88 million were unemployed, and 10 million were living with HIV/AIDS. It also found that youth policy was driven by negative stereotypes of young people. A further 4 years on, the situation remains grim. 89% of the global youth population of 1.5 billion live in developing countries. Many of those young people are unable to secure decent work and are on average 3 times more likely to be unemployed than adults. In the last decade, the world's youth population grew by 10.5%, while youth employment only grew by 0.2%. And the International Labour Organization estimates that another billion young people will be entering the global labour market within the next 10 years. It's time now to hear from our panellists, and once they've had their say, I'll invite questions from the audience. Our first panellist is Carolyn Hardy, who has been Chief Executive of UNICEF Australia since 2004. UNICEF is, of course, the United Nations Children's Fund, and its mission is to protect children and contribute to their well-being through the provision of education, healthcare, essential medicines, vaccines, water and sanitation, and emergency supplies. Carolyn.
Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody. Hi to everybody who's beaming in today. Look, it's such a pleasure to be here today for this particular World Bank Praxis series, given that this week is the 20th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that's such an important document for all youth agencies, including UNICEF. As Ian said, it is one of the most widely ratified international human rights treaties in history. It's 54 protocols and 54 provisions, and the optional protocols articulate the full complement of civil, political, cultural, social and economic rights for all children. What that means is that it's aiming to ensure that children everywhere have access to absolute basic services that we would call a right here. That means access to shelter, access to food, access to education and much, much more. We do know that since 1990, over 70 of the countries that have ratified the CRC have incorporated children's codes into their national legislation. And we also know that the CRC has had a profound influence on public institutions, policies, budgets and various social protection initiatives. However, I think, as we all agree and know, the full significance of the CRC extends far beyond its legislative implications. And this week is the perfect time and the right time for us to be looking at the CRC 20 years on and looking at what difference has it really made? How have children's lives around the world changed? Have they changed for the better? And is this document a live and real document that's being used and being followed? Thankfully, there has been significant progress and there is reason for celebration and applause. The era of the Convention has marked extreme advances in child survival and child development. Recent research released by UNICEF in September of this year showed that the number of children under the age of 5 who die unnecessarily from preventable causes like poverty and disease has fallen from 12.5 million in 1990 to less than 9 million in 2008. That means each day 10,000 less children are dying from preventable causes. Of course, the number who still die is far too great and much too large. But the point I'm trying to make is it is going in the right direction and significant change is being made. Further, the number of children not in school has dropped by almost 15 million in the last 2 years alone. Now more than 90% of children in developing countries are in primary school. We are working to help them stay there until the end. Fabia is going to talk about this more a little bit later, so I'm not going to labour the education point. But there are improvements being made, and there's also a significant improvement in the number of girls attending school as well. However, there are absolutely still challenges, which Ian touched on in his introduction. Despite these improvements, globally almost 1 billion children lack access to at least one essential service that's vital for their survival, such as clean water or proper nutrition. We still have children fighting as child soldiers, and we still have children exploited in bonded labour. Now, I realise this is an audience of NGOs and that we have development people and NGOs beaming in, and that very little of this is new news, but this is a moment in time for us to stop and look at what is the situation, what progress has been made, what challenges exist, and how are we as a group addressing those challenges. In addition, something that none of us foresaw, and it certainly wasn't looked at when the CRC was originally put together, was the added impact that the global financial crisis would have had on progress over the last 12 months. While the impact on adults, such as unemployment or hunger, will largely be short-term, we know that the impact on children will be irrevocable and not short-term. In a lot of cases, it will last a lifetime. If a child's malnourished, it can stunt their physical and mental development forever. We know that that's irreversible. We also know that if a child drops out of primary school due to financial reasons or various other causes, it's likely they will not return to school. So the impact of the last 12 months on children throughout the world is going to have an irrevocable or an irreversible impact. The effect of the financial crisis on children is especially profound in Asia, East Asia and the Pacific region, right here on our doorstep. We know that food prices have been soaring for the last few years. They've soared even more during the last 12 months. An example is that today in Laos, the poorest households will be spending 80% of their income on food. That compares to 60% of the poorest households in other countries throughout the region. We're already seeing statistics from Indonesia, Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam, which show that 1/3 of children in those countries will suffer stunting due to lack of nutrition over the past 12 months. And even in education, where Asian countries have recorded impressive gains over the last 20 years, the financial crisis is threatening to wind back those gains. The major issue in these countries is the vast and deep inequality. The poor are far less likely to have access to basic services anyway, and their situation has been exacerbated by the global financial crisis over the last 12 months. So that brings me to the last point I wanted to make, and that's action. What does need to be done? What are we all advocating on this, the 20th anniversary of the CRC, and what is really achievable? And the major challenge is getting safety nets in place that are effective, comprehensive, and not susceptible to budget cuts. Now, this is not an easy feat, I know that. It's very easy to say it and very easy for that to roll off my tongue, but that is the key to this. Social protection measures, maintaining them, improving them, introducing them where they don't exist is the main thing we as a group need to be doing over the next 12 months. We need to be continuing simple, cost-effective interventions that have proven to be effective and that are behind that drop in mortality figure that I mentioned earlier. Those things include immunisation, treated mosquito nets, vitamin supplement programs. UNICEF has shown that these interventions do deliver a consistent decrease in preventable child deaths. Maintaining and improving these interventions, as well as social protection measures, will involve the continuous commitment of international development agencies, of NGOs, of governments in both developing countries and richer countries. Here in Australia, it's worth noting that the Australian government is actually doing pretty well. It's recommitted to its target to boost ODA spending to 0.5% of GNI. It's also entered a partnership agreement with UNICEF as part of a $200 million commitment to UN agencies to align aid spending with the Millennium Development Goals and the targets within those goals and the deadlines for those goals. The CRC was long fought for and it was hard won. It has made significant progress. Whilst there is so much to be done, it's important that we remember that this is an important document and it has achieved so much. The great challenge for the next 20 years will be to unite government accountability with individual responsibility and maintain this commitment and continue the progress that's been made over the last 20 years. It's essential that we as a group recognise, maintain and improve all of our efforts to realise child rights, especially amidst the new challenges that have been posed by the global financial crisis. In closing, I'd just like to add that the CRC, in order to make the CRC a reality for every child, it has to be a living guiding document that is used by governments everywhere, it is understood by governments everywhere, and it is used and advocated for by agencies like all of ours. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Carolyn. Next we'll hear from Joel Kalpram. Joel is a ni-Vanuatu student who spent 6 years as project manager for the Australian NGO Youth Challenge Vanuatu, working to develop leadership and capacity building through the involvement of young people in Vanuatu. Joel joined the organisation after participating in the youth programme's leadership development workshops. He has also worked in HIV/AIDS awareness, land issues and life skills training, and was twice selected to attend the Oxfam International Youth Partnership meetings, one in Sydney and the other in Fiji. And he is presently in Australia to complete a Bachelor of Social Science degree majoring in community development. Joel.
Thank you, Ian. Hello, everyone, and hello to our colleagues in PNG and Timor-Leste. Today I will talk about some development trends in Vanuatu as they relate to young people and their needs for greater level of participation and awareness of community development issues. Another point I want to make is that well-being can obviously be an outcome of formal economic development, but in island Melanesia, this is not the only source of happiness and a sense of self-worth. As a ni-Vanuatu student, I can only speak for Vanuatu, but some of the issues I will discuss are relevant for youth in other Pacific countries. Each year, Australian Agency for International Development releases a report on economic growth and development in Pacific Island countries and Timor-Leste. The 2009 report has just been released, and it reveals a mixture of good and not so good trends for Vanuatu. On the positive side, in 2008, Vanuatu's economy grew by 6.3%, which was the best performance for any Pacific country. Tourist arrival rose by 18% in 2008, and this growth is expected to continue. Growth in tourism sector is approaching 30% in GDP in Vanuatu. In terms of improvement in government effectiveness and control of corruption, the World Bank's own measuring system describes significant improvements for Vanuatu, which ranks very high in the regional list for quality of governance. In infrastructure, telecommunication competitions has seen a drastic reduction in cost of SIM cards for mobile phones. The cost of handset is down from $100 to $25. Mobile phone coverage went from 20% of the population in 2007 to 75% in 2008. In terms of Millennium Development Goals, Vanuatu is on track to meet three of the 8 targets, these being 1, poverty reduction goals, reduction in child mortality, and third is gender equality and empowerment of women. Not so good. Vanuatu's most worrying trends are serious failure to meet goals on universal primary education and failure to improve maternal health. With educational challenges, there are problems not just with universal access, but also with the quality of education being delivered. The AusAID report states, the quote, a 2007 survey of literacy level in Vanuatu, for example, found that 27% of children who had completed 6 years or more of school could not write 3 dictated sentences. So what are some of the applications of these trends for young people in Vanuatu? Firstly, economic growth is foundation for creation of employment opportunity for young people in formal sector. Each year, there are 700 new jobs being created in formal labor. This does not take into account the improved income spin-offs in the non-formal employment sector and the custom economy. The challenge, however, is that there are 3,500 new entrants to labor market each year, which is 5 times the number of new jobs created. It would also be safe to say that the vast majority of the 700 new jobs created each year are only available in the two urban areas of Port Vila and Luganville. However, 80% of the population live outside of these urban areas in the outer islands of Vanuatu. It is important to remember that reports on the formal cash economy are not the only indicator of well-being in a country like Vanuatu. Village life, subsistence agriculture, traditional custom, and family networks provide well-being for vast majority of ni-Vanuatu rural youth. Development assessment often overlooks these important social systems in island Melanesia. There are even some experts who suggest that the advent of cash economy can do more damage than good in lives of young people. Father Francis Azel, a Catholic priest who is the director of research institute called the Micronesian Seminar, based in Federated States of Micronesia, says that the advent of the cash economy has contributed to youth suicide in that part of the Pacific. Young people need to be able to deal with the reality, and their chances of finding paid employment are very small. In addition to awareness, they also need to advocate the same way there has been as much needed and successful program in Vanuatu to develop an empowerment of women. Young people of both genders need a similar advocacy and policy change to address their needs. One positive story for youth has been the election to Parliament in 2008. Our former Cultural Center Director, Mr. Ralph Regenvanu. Ralph was elected as an independent in Port Vila constituency with a record of a high number of votes. Many of these votes, if not the majority, came from young people. Ralph holds a degree in anthropology, and through his distinguished career in promoting Vanuatu culture, Ralph has been an outspoken supporter for young people. In January 2009, he announced that he would use his allowance as a member of parliament to set up finance scholarship for students at University of the South Pacific. In March of this year, Ralph began to finance a youth solidarity microcredit scheme out of his parliamentary allocation, providing loans to assist several young people in setting up small business projects. Having politicians who are committed to youth issue is vital if young people are to develop awareness of development issues that affect them. In addition to good youth advocacy, Vanuatu young people are very much in need of continuing support of NGOs who focus on youth affairs. At present, vital work is being done by organizations such as famous Once More Back the Other, the Foundation of the South Pacific, People of the South Pacific, the organization I work for, Youth Challenge Vanuatu. NGOs fill the gap left by government inability to probably fund all social programs across the country. And this organization will play an important role for a long time yet. Another important recent development has been the setting up of the Vanuatu National Youth Council. A dead avenue for facilitating the voice of young people is the developing role that information technology is playing in the lives of young people. In 2006, a group of NGOs with government support set up the Vanuatu Youth in the Agency Group, which meets each month and also has an online discussion group where young people debate and discuss development issues that affect them. At the moment, this is limited to urban areas so that rural young people would need to be focused in terms of access to computers and learning about how they can benefit from communication that these networks provide. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Joel. Finally, I'd like to introduce Fabia Shah. Fabia is a senior education advisor with AusAID in Canberra, and she has extensive field experience in the education sector with a specific focus on Asia and the Pacific, including teaching and technical assignments in Fiji, Tonga, Samoa and Vanuatu, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal and India. She has worked for a range of international development agencies, including the Asian Development Bank, the Germany-based International Cooperation Enterprise GTZ, the EU and the UN. Fabia has recently returned from 3 years in Pakistan, where she was AusAID Chief Programme Advisor with responsibility for education. Fabia.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to say welcome to everybody here and also our televised audiences, and begin by saying that it's a very broad topic, the topic of youth, so I'd like to refine it a bit and perhaps draw on some of the points that have been made by the previous speakers, but particularly with the focus on education. And I'd like to start off by just running through some of the numbers, some of which have already been mentioned. But to talk about education in the Pacific, one is talking essentially about very large numbers of young people. About 1/3 of the population of the Pacific are classified as youth, and that of course varies from country to country. But in PNG you have figures of significant numbers of young people under 20. It's almost half of the population in PNG. In Port Moresby, youth between 15 and 24 represent about 35% of the population. And about 28% nationally. So we're talking about a very young population. In Timor-Leste, of course, we're talking about around 48% of the population being under the age of 15. So a large cohort of young people coming on stream, looking for future work opportunities, a point that both the previous speakers have mentioned. To give you just a comparison, Australia's youth population is estimated at 19%. So that gives you a little bit of a benchmark of where the Pacific are. We're talking about a very young population. So preparing and enabling young people to seek meaningful opportunities in ways in which they choose in the Pacific represents a real challenge for many Pacific Island governments. And I'd like to run through some of those challenges, if I may, and talk specifically about the education sector. The first key challenge is providing for the very young in terms of early childhood and primary education, and not just providing access. The Pacific's done rather well in terms of providing access to children for primary education, for MDGs 2 and 3. But in terms of providing quality education, the outcomes have been not so strong. And Joel has already mentioned some very, very worrying statistics about the number of functionally literate young people coming out of school, both in terms of their functional literacy and numeracy skills. So preparing those people for the job market where they've already had a bad head start with poor education quality is a formidable challenge. That requires some significant changes in teacher training, in the curriculums, making them more relevant for young people. This is a critical feedback we get all the time is, we need to have relevant curriculums that are meaningful for us and are also aligned with the work placements that we want to make or the work choices that we want to make later on. So there is this very, very significant challenge of improving quality as well as access of education. There's also the issue of gender challenges. Whilst it's been noted that the Pacific has done rather well in terms of gender equality overall, particularly at the primary level, there's still significant inequalities for women. In particular, women are particularly disadvantaged at the secondary level. So when we're talking about equality of opportunity and access in the MDGs, we need to remember that there's still significant inequalities there for women. When we look at the technical and vocational training sector and the tertiary sector, those inequalities become even more pronounced. Many women don't have the opportunities to travel from remote areas, for example, to go to school elsewhere, and the tertiary systems and the tech voc systems are rather traditional and not suited to their particular needs. So there are still significant gender obstacles for young women, youth, in terms of pursuing work-life options. The other challenge I'd like to mention, and it's I think one that's often forgotten, is the challenge for young disabled youth in the Pacific and elsewhere. Certainly an issue that was very visible in countries where I have worked, such as Pakistan and Afghanistan, perhaps a bit more invisible in the Pacific, but that makes it even more worrying. And those challenges of how to provide meaningful schooling and work choices for people with disabilities are significant in the Pacific. So what kinds of alternatives do we have? ICTs may be one in terms of linking those people up, but there's also even just the physical access issues that we need to grapple with to enable those children to attend school. The statistics are very rubbery on this, of course, because they're not recorded very well, but it's estimated that only 10% of children in South Asia and the Pacific actually get disabled children have an opportunity to go to school. And very few of those actually last the duration of their schooling life. So this is a real challenge. And of course, Joel's mentioned this, that the challenge of geography, providing an education for people in rural communities, but also in remote island communities. How do we provide education in a meaningful way for those children? So I'd like to just move on and talk a little bit about technical and vocational training. There's been a very big increase in demand for technical and vocational training, a very much youth-driven demand in the last 10 years. People want courses after the completion of primary and secondary school that are relevant to work choices, that are linked to labour market opportunities, that provide real opportunities for them to do things post-schooling. And of course, the opportunities in the Pacific remain still very limited with regard to technical and vocational training. Australia is doing some work in this area through the Australia Pacific Training Centres, but there's still considerable work to be done, and of course investments to be made by Pacific Island countries themselves. And there are real challenges there in terms of a contracting private sector market, challenges for a public sector which has been hit hard by the recession. Courses that are in existence are often not relevant to work choices, and the curriculum is inappropriate. So there are real challenges to making those technical and vocational opportunities relevant and meaningful for young people. The same challenges that I've mentioned in relation to primary and secondary education are even more pronounced in the technical and vocational training sector. I won't go into those, but the challenges of gender, of geography, of disability, all of those challenges are very manifest in the technical and vocational training sector. I want to just finish, if I may, just in terms of technical and vocational training, just to recap on some of the issues and maybe throw some questions out here.
one of the key issues that I've mentioned is the need for a really strong basic education, getting through that education pyramid with the functional literacy and numeracy skills that are required for lifelong learning, for youth, for employment, but as well as that, lifelong learning. And this is a really key challenge in the Pacific at the moment, and one that I think we need to address very rapidly given the young population. The second challenge is this challenge of making education at secondary level, at post-secondary level, tertiary level accessible to all. And the third challenge, of course, is trying to link young people into labour markets that are essentially very, very small. And how do we meet that challenge with possibly contracting public sector markets and a lack of emphasis on expanding the private sector opportunities? So just a few challenges to throw out to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabia. Now we've heard from each of our panellists. It's time to invite questions. While we're waiting for questions to come through from our remote audiences, I'll kick things off and see if anyone in Sydney has any points to make based on what they've heard, or if they've got any questions for any of our particular panellists at all. Right here, please.
My name's Annie Pettit. I'm the Child Rights Specialist with Save the Children Australia, and I've actually just arrived back from Vanuatu, where I was last week, where I was conducting a analysis workshop where we've been doing a child rights situation analysis for Vanuatu, and all of the issues that you've all raised, especially education, came through as very strong concerns and issues in the process of this child rights situation analysis. We spoke with approximately 600 children and young people, together with people from NGOs and government. And one of the very concerning things is access and quality of education. And as you've mentioned, the issue of very remote communities. And I'm just wondering how we actually address the issue of, we're talking about communities that are sometimes very small, don't have schools even in the proximity, or perhaps there's a school. One of the stories that we heard was of a community where the closest school was in a neighbouring community, and because of a land dispute, the children were too scared to go to school. So in a lot of cases of children simply not going to school, and I think that this is a real issue for children of primary school age who have absolutely no access to going to school. They're too small to be sent away to boarding school, and how we provide some kind of locally based education that may be through locally trained adults who may not be formally teachers, but perhaps could provide some local education. Whether any of you have any experience of examples of how do we really get to these children to provide access to education, because we know the benefit of education relates to so many other human rights and seems such a fundamental starting point. I just wonder if, I know it's not directed to anyone individually, but if any of you have any suggestions or examples of how do we really get to the primary school aged children who are in very remote communities where there are no schools. Thank you.
Okay, any ideas?
Well, I don't have a panacea, unfortunately, but there are some good examples of ways to improve access. Unfortunately, they're usually very costly. This is the issue in the Pacific, where the cost, the per head cost ratio of trying to improve access as well as quality is really quite high. But for example, in Tonga and Samoa, one way that they're trying to, or have tried to address this problem of access, is to provide stipends and fees for young people to come across, and transport to come across on boats to the most local school available. Of course, that's not going to be possible for all children. Also supporting teachers to rotate amongst different island communities and train up locals at the same time, but then moving around the communities, providing extra stipends and support for them to go from community to community. The other issue which we haven't mentioned today is the critical role of ICTs, which haven't been fully explored, I think, in the Pacific context and probably ought to be. Certainly in other parts of the world, in Africa, they're being used far more widely than they have been in the Pacific. I'm not sure if Joel has something to comment there, but I think there is a really critical role for ICTs and distance education, providing learning through distance education modules, whether it's through radio or television, has proven to be very effective and cost effective as well.
Lovely. Got another question for you, actually, Fabia. This is from Sue Kent from the Ministry of Education in Timor-Leste, and she asks, are there any programs for the development of curriculum across the region?
Yes, I think Sue's over here, so I'll face Sue. Well, there are, from the AusAID side, the curriculum development programs are really are quite expansive, both in ranging from Papua New Guinea right through to Indonesia. Of course, you would be aware of some of the programs in Timor-Leste, which are just being developed at the moment. In Tonga, we have a strong curriculum development component within our education program, and similarly in Samoa. From an AusAID perspective, the approach has always been not just to focus on access, but to focus on curriculum, teacher training, all of those components that improve quality as well as access as far as possible. And we're still learning. We're still a little bit on this learning path there, but the curriculum development, I think, is a very critical part. And coming back to something I said earlier, many students have come back, as well as teachers, have come back and said that a key problem with retention of students in school is an outmoded curriculum, an irrelevant curriculum, a curriculum that's not meaningful for the work-life choices that young people wish to make. So I think it's absolutely critical that we look at curriculum as part of any education program.
Great. Can we have another question from Sydney, please, at the back?
Hi, I'm Olivia Cawthorne from World Vision. We've heard a lot today about the development challenges facing youth, but I wonder if anyone can tell me about the role that youth can actually play in the development process.
Joel, would you like to share your thoughts on that one?
I guess involving as young people as much, developing programs to engage young people and utilize them. And I mean, a good example is, in Vanuatu situation, sometimes you get, leaders saying stuff about young people, saying, this is what you should do. But instead of getting young people to say, this is what we want, instead of getting young people to say what they want, you get, So there's a big challenge as well I'm sure in Vanuatu, but in a lot of places as well. So getting, developing programs where you can engage and involve as much as young people, to come up with, whatever they think best that will help them to address their issues.
Yeah, I mentioned in my introduction, I talked about the negative stereotypes of young people, which is across the board. It's in developed countries as well as in developing nations, of course. But referring back to a couple of points that you made in your speech there, Joel, you were talking about how good it's been now that there's an MP who is working with young people and is listening to young people and is taking their thoughts on board. How empowered do the youth of Vanuatu, and it's a very broad question, but what's your general sense of the empowerment of young people in Vanuatu? Do they feel that they're listened to? Or is there still a sense of, nobody takes us seriously because we're under the age of 18 or 15 or 12 or whatever it is?
I think recently there have been a lot of positive changes. More, not just this one key person going to politics. There's also, during the election, there was also another youth group as well that, they said, we're going to stand up as well. And so recently you've been seeing a lot of young people more involving in politics and, because in the past it's always like, only, big men talk about politics. But now you're getting more involvement from young people involving, and I think that's a good thing. To be, young people showing interest and stuff.
Yeah, please, yeah.
The Convention on the Rights of the Child does have, as you know, a section on participation of children and youth, and an expectation that youth does have a say and it does have a voice. But I think in order for that to really happen and not be a tokenistic inclusion of youth, this is what you need. It needs to be done at senior government level, where somebody in government does have responsibility for this, and where there are structures and infrastructure that exist in order to gather kids or youth together, and a structured way for them to genuinely participate and genuinely feedback.
Absolutely. Can we get another question, please? Right up at the back.
Stephen Close from the Human Development Unit in the World Bank in Sydney. I just wanted to add a couple of comments about the quality of education and curriculum as being so critical in equipping youth with the skills they need to take advantage of economic opportunities, and that's really where it comes back to. To go right back to the very foundations of learning, development partners have been disappointed with the experience of education quality in the region. Access has improved, but education quality is definitely still a challenge. What we're finding is that assessment of reading acquisition in the early grades of school can provide, from global experience, it can provide a real breakthrough in focusing attention on the quality of learning the core learning skills, rather than waiting until it's too late and finding that a large cohort of students have emerged from primary education without those basic skills. Once those learning skills are in place, youth are better equipped to take advantage of more training opportunities later on. The early grade reading assessment is the specific tool we've been using recently to consider that in the region. On the issue of curriculum, I think there's been a lot of experience on quality curriculum. One of the challenges is that as development partners have been introducing countries in the region to more outcomes-based curriculum, the experience has been that the education systems sometimes don't have the resources to support some of these transitions, such as the difficult experience of introducing this reform in Papua New Guinea, for instance. Another consideration with curriculum is the need for it to be embedded over time and to be monitored in its embedding. You can't just develop a curriculum and walk away. I guess another interesting lesson on curriculum is that for it to be relevant doesn't necessarily mean that governments should be spending large amounts of money on tooling up secondary schools to become technical education centres. Sometimes the best investment is in management of schools, so that there are managers of schools who can use community resources and can mobilise what's available from the school community and make linkages with employers, for instance. So it doesn't need to be a cost-intensive transition, but it should be more about empowering schools to find their own solutions to making curriculum more relevant to their local students.
Thanks for those points, Stephen. Everyone's nodding away at that. I think they've been well made. The issue of the quality of education is something, Fabia, you've talked about, Joel, you stressed as well, Carolyn as well. What is the key to it? Why is it failing? Is it lack of resources? Is it lack of properly qualified teachers? Are there other issues? What's at the core of this?
Perhaps if I could start, and please jump in. But I think very difficult to answer very quickly, but it's not a matter of resources, as my World Bank colleague has just underlined. There's been a strong emphasis on access. One of the negative spin-offs, so to speak, of the MDGs, the target set there has been a strong emphasis on access. And the intent was certainly not to do that at the neglect of quality, but part of the response has been to neglect quality in teacher training, curriculum development, all of the ingredients of a meaningful education in that process of trying to increase the numbers. So we have a situation not just in the Pacific, of course, but also in South Asia, where we have some really strong access results. But when we're looking at learning outcomes in these early years, doing testing of early years outcomes, we're having very, very poor results. And the economic inefficiencies of that are, of course, manifest. So it's a mixture, and the responses are really to go back to the basics, to look at teacher training. Teachers are the critical point at which quality education is imparted. A well-trained, well-equipped teacher makes all the difference. So there has been a strong sort of shift back to looking at teacher training, improving the quality of teacher training, and also allowing Joel's point of enabling communities as well as students to have a real input into the curriculum. So through parent, teacher and student councils and these sorts of things. Yeah.
I think as part of that too, UNICEF has a program called Child Friendly Schools, which we were talking about earlier. And that has really had a good look, not just at curriculum and teacher training and how what sort of support does teachers have in schools, but also what's the method of teaching. And what it's trying to do is make the content of the curriculum very, very accessible for the youth in those classrooms and move away from that very traditional format of teaching, which is still used in so many countries. So it's different in every country according to need, but I think that is showing great gains so far, and it is being expanded, so hopefully that will add quite a lot to this as well.
And staying on the subject of the quality of education, but also access to education, this is a question again from you, for you, Fabia, from Alfonso Soares, again from the Minister of Education in Timor-Leste. And the point is made that Timor-Leste has the same challenge of improving the quality of education, but right now the focus is more on access education for children. So what's the best way to overcome these challenges? And could you offer some advice or some suggestions on how education in Timor-Leste can improve access and quality?
Yes, I think I don't have the answers, but I think in Timor-Leste there are real challenges geographically as well, also post-conflict, so it has an enormous amount of internal challenges. I think that the emphasis on access, as I've just said earlier, you can emphasise both quality and access at the same time, and in fact to do one at the neglect of the other will see you with some not very strong dividends in 10 or 15 years. So I would strongly encourage an emphasis on both access and quality, on setting in place good learning assessment systems, early reading assessments, early numeracy assessments, as well as systems for looking at improving access in remote communities. And that might, coming back to the point I made earlier, mean exploring options around ICTs, exploring different ways of how to access those communities, perhaps with stipends at the secondary school level for young women and men to pursue further education. So I guess my message would be, I completely understand the emphasis on improving access and think it's very important, but at the same time would encourage you to focus on the quality dimensions as well.
Lovely. Another question from Sydney, please.
My name's John Uri. I'm actually a postgraduate student at UTS. I noticed that a lot of the presentation today is talking about the quality of education in the Pacific. Now, having understood that education has been there for the last 60 or 70 years, what is different now that there is a drive now to improve the quality of education in the Pacific, particularly in the Melanesian sector and Polynesian sector? What is the drive there, and what does AusAID or the government actually hope to achieve by having a quality of education there, if you actually take into account that there is actually nothing there that the government is saying that in the future that they will encourage students to actually undertake tertiary education in Australia at all? Are we doing this just for the sake of having quality education in the home country and that's all it is? Or is there any other goal to encourage those young people to come and have study in Australia paid for by the government?
Fabia, any thoughts on that?
Would someone else like to jump in? No, I think that the issue of quality has actually been raised largely by many Pacific Island countries, and it should be, of course, driven from there. But what they're seeing is that, as I mentioned earlier, that many children and youth are coming out of secondary school without even the basic functional literacy, numeracy skills that enable them to go into technical and vocational training courses, for example. So with the Asia Pacific Training College, it's an initiative that Australia is supporting at the moment. We've found that we've had to provide bridging courses for students leaving secondary school to even come into the college because they don't have those basic skills. So I think the point about it's not just quality education as an end in itself, but it's preparing young people with the basic skills that they need to make the sorts of productive life choices and employment choices that they wish to make. The flip side of that is the commitment by governments and working with the private sector to have some space for those young people to, of course, find employment. And that's something we haven't discussed today, is that really critical issue around what employment. In some countries, those employment opportunities, as Joel's mentioned, is only 500 new jobs a year and 3,500 new entrants, so very limited work options. But the point is that then with a quality education, young people are able to find meaningful employment either in their own communities or, as we find in the Pacific, many people migrate elsewhere. There's a great deal of internal migration within the Pacific, including to Australia and New Zealand, of course, but even within the Pacific region to find employment.
Yeah, Joel, I was actually going to ask you, and you've led into that nicely, Fabia. In your experience of people that you were growing up with, perhaps, how many stay in Vanuatu and how many are going elsewhere in the Pacific or to Australia, New Zealand, looking for work because of the lack of employment opportunities at home for you?
Recently, people have been moving, a lot. There's been also like programs in terms of not just education, but as well as finding jobs. The Vanuatu government in New Zealand has just started the fruit picking system, which is quite big in Vanuatu these days, and a lot of ni-Vanuatu are going to New Zealand for work. But that's also opening doors to other opportunities as well for people to move around. Like Fabia said, not just within Australia and New Zealand, but I've seen Vanuatu people moving within other Pacific islands as well. Yeah. And from my own experience, not so many people do that in the past couple of years, but I've seen a lot of changes in terms of people moving around within places and finding works and establishing. And yeah.
Lovely. We've got a question for Carolyn from Timor, and this is from Jose Pereira from AusAID. He asks, what is the best measure for addressing child labour, which has become common practice in poorer families where children help their parents for income generation in farms and businesses rather than allowing them to study in a condition of limited employment opportunities?
Look, it's such a tough question, Jose, and it's such a complex area. I think if we look at the last 12 months, I don't know if it's the best way, but I think it's probably the only achievable way, and that is social protection nets and social protection measures for those families. The reality is a lot of children are being pulled out of school because their parents, A, can't afford to keep them there, and B, need them for whatever income generation those children can produce. And there is no choice in a lot of cases for those families, as you would well know. So UNICEF is advocating social protection, it's advocating support for those families, cash contributions where necessary. The difficulty is, as we know, that that's not sustainable long term. So the wider, more complex issue of child labour as a whole then needs to be looked at. And it is being looked at, but it's not an easy answer, and it changes country to country according to the type of labour, the sources, the reasons, whether it's rural, whether it's city-based, etc., etc.
Time for another question from Sydney, please, just in the middle.
My name is Dizala. I'm coming from the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies, Sydney University. I want to learn from Carolyn about the emergency program that you may be having for the disaster-prone countries, like Samoa now, it was hit by the tsunami. Mm-hmm. How did you react to that? And what other program do you have? Because the region is prone to so many natural disasters. What educational emergency programs are there? 2, also what educational stimulus package have you implemented during this time of the economic crunch in the education section. Thank you.
Okay. Well, the short answer is UNICEF reacted immediately when the Samoa and Tonga happened recently. We do have an education continuance program in place. It has involved both School in a Box as well as restarting education with partners, not just us, but with SAVE and various other NGOs in the region as well. Children, for the most part, are getting back into school. It may not be the school they were in, but it is some form of learning. Economic stimulus for education in the Pacific? I don't know the answer to that. I know that it has been looked at. I know that the global financial crisis has been the cause of a huge amount of analysis by UNICEF's office in the Pacific. It is at the point where a number of those countries do require cash stimulus direct to families to be able to keep their children there. But I don't know what's been done, but I can find out for you.
Thanks, Carolyn. We'll just finish off with a quick question for Fabia again. This is from Jarius Ligu of UNICEF in Timor. And you're asked, despite the challenges, why is the region doing better in gender issues but not in youth agenda?
Very good question. Well, I think in the Pacific, at primary level, there has been perhaps not the same impediments to girls' education. They've been addressed very, very early on. There certainly is still real challenges in Papua New Guinea, for example, and parts of Vanuatu, as Joel will attest to, and as well in Fiji and other countries. But there's not been the same emphasis at the secondary level. Still, girls are very much encouraged to follow traditional occupations post-primary. There has not been the same scope of opportunity, something I mentioned earlier, for young women to pursue further education, either through lack of access, a lack of mobility, if you like, plus very, very conventional sort of choices that are limited to them. So I think this is where it requires a real focus in the next couple of decades, is to look at increasing those opportunities for young women, in particular post-primary, and opening up opportunities into perhaps non-traditional fields for employment. So looking at, for example, in the Australian Pacific Training College is looking at offering non-traditional traditionally male occupational trades training for women in areas like mechanics, engineering, automotive trades, and there's been quite a take-up, which has been really interesting. So women are really keen to enter into those sort of different occupations and away from the traditional ones of, say, nursing and teaching. But it's about opening up those work opportunities for women at the same time, so that they see a raison d'etre for going through further education. So they're both linked.
Thank you, Fabia. That's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for your company in Sydney, also in Canberra, and in Dili and in Port Moresby. And particularly thanks to our panellists, to Carolyn Hardy, to Joel Kalpram, and to Fabia Shah. You can see this edition of Praxis at www.worldbank.org/Praxis. Praxis is going to be taking a break for a couple of months over the summer, but we will be back again in January. Thank you very much indeed.